Welcome back, gamers. I'm sure a lot of you read the title and went, wow.
This guy finally decided to make his guide, and the raid tier's already been out for multiple weeks already. What a joke.
And in the wise words of Gandalf the Grey,
a wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
I decided to wait on the guide because when I last released the guide for you guys related to maximizing your DPS, it came with the downside of learning a bunch of tools on how to do good DPS when you had no good gear. So this time, I decided to take things in a different direction and show you what fully optimized parsing guides look like when you have your full kit at our disposal. On top of that, we do a lot of lore dropping on some stuff that's just good for the entire raid and just about every single boss in this guide, so make sure to watch all the way through and take notes. Also, like, comment, and subscribe, or call me bald in the comments or something, I don't know, I just need the engagement. It has also come to my attention that during this raid tier, things are a little bit different, and we are finally in a raid tier where all three specs are pretty strong in their own right, and I felt like if I didn't have the chance to play all three of them proficiently, I would have made a pretty ill-informed guide and not been able to make a legitimate parse guide, and spoiler alert, well, the subcopers were correct. Unlike last raid tier, I'm doing away with the general rotation guides for every boss, as I received plenty of comments from you, the viewers, that you didn't really enjoy listening to me drone on about the sub-rotation on every single boss, and honestly, I didn't like doing it. So this time, we're going to do away with that, and we're just going to fine-tune every single boss exactly to our liking to ensure that we can squeeze every little bit of DPS out of every boss possible. So, let's get into it. Starting off with Beth, we are going to break this boss into two parts. One part for combat rogues downstairs, and the assassination and sub rogues upstairs. If you are playing assassination or sub downstairs, the simple answer is, don't do that. That's bad. For the specs going upstairs, you start this boss off the exact same way. And by that I mean begging your raid leader for a variant pull timer based off of whatever trinkets that you have. For 75-second trinkets, you're going to want to reset them at 32 seconds before the pull, Matrix at 77 seconds before the pull, and Hunger and the Tailoring Cloak Enchant at 17 seconds before the pull. Doing this will ensure that when you go up to DPS Beth, your trinkets and cloak will be off cooldown for your first burst phase. If you go up on a later web than your mages, give yourself an extra 3 to 4 seconds for all of these items besides Matrix, as it lasts 30 seconds and you're only upstairs for roughly that long anyways. Past that, all three rogue specs will start off on the boss the same way. Sub-rogues will make sure to ask a healer for some free combo points before the pull, that way you can crank on the spinners a little bit harder before the fight starts. You will immediately run into the center of the room and sit with your hands idly until the boss decides to send adds down, at which time all three specs will try and focus on just using slice and dice and getting whatever damage you can off on adds because they get steamrolled by the rest of your raid in an instant. For combat, your goal is to focus on the drones and spinners downstairs. The more cleave you are offered, the better you will parse. So talk to your tank about taunting spinners into the drones, as well as cleaving off of other drones while a drone is up. The first drone spawns at a time where there isn't really much going on downstairs, which means you are unlikely to get much cleave on the first set, so just make sure to tricks your tank the moment it comes out so that you're making effective use of your 4-set buff, and then immediately get into a shallow insight and rip killing spree, then adrenaline rush right after, and toggle blade flurry whenever the opportunity presents itself to cleave and blast adds. Generally speaking, if you're using the normal strat, you will get 3 sets of safe use cooldowns before phase 2, so long as you pop them off cooldown and are playing smart with your finishers to reduce adrenaline rush and killing spree effectively. For assassination, the biggest thing that you can do is optimize when you head upstairs with a solid redirect onto Beth so that you can immediately rupture. For sub, make sure to pre-target Beth if you don't have any combo points as you're heading up, and immediately redirect if you do. That way the moment you are up there, you can immediately start ramping towards your burn phase by getting a recoup and or a rupture up. The easiest way to do this is to already have a slice and dice up. Use Honor Amongst Thieves to generate combo points alongside your redirect to get a 2 to 3 combo point recoup, and then immediately vanish into a pre-med ambush and get a 5 combo point rupture up on the boss with Master of Subtlety. You will spend the rest of this time during your first Find Weakness to ensure you have a solid setup for the first Shadow Dance. Pull energy for your first Shadow Dance, then pop Shadow Dance if you have any combo points, spam Ambush until 5 combo points and Eviscerate. Never use Shadow Step on your first Ambush and Dance because it will not benefit from the damage bonus from Find Weakness. Assassination, on the other hand, has a much easier time on the startup. You will redirect whatever combo points you have immediately into a Rupture on Beth. After that, you'll vanish, use Garrote, and then use the combo point that you get from Garrote to slice and dice if you don't already have it up. If you do already have it up, you'll pop Vendetta, Gloves, and then burn the boss and use a 5 combo point Cold Blood with an Envenom. The in-between phases for the up and down stairs for sub and assassination are kind of muddled by circumstance, but generally speaking, just do your best to do as much damage as possible while maintaining slice and dice and or recoup for your next upstairs phase. After that, basically rinse and repeat from here. I can't specify exactly when Beth will come down because it depends on how your raid is handling the drones, but if your guild is killing drones normally, simply Shadow Dance every time you go upstairs, or Vendetta every other time. Vanish the first time you go upstairs as Assassination, and then save the second Vanish for the second phase, and for Subtlety, you can basically just use it off of cooldown because you'll have one during phase 2 no matter what. When phase 2 starts, regardless of whether you were up or downstairs, try to have combo points to redirect, or a slice and dice ready for each spec. If you were playing sub, you can basically just target the boss and get free combo points from healing. If you were combat, and the drone doesn't die super early, you could just redirect from the drone. But if you're assassination, the best you can hope for is maintaining some combo points on the boss before she comes down. When phase 2 starts, the boss dies fairly quickly, so the biggest thing to focus on is optimizing cooldowns. For all 3 specs, the primary thing that you want to focus on is popping your agility pot when it couples with other big cooldowns nicely like trinkets or your spec cooldowns in general. Most guilds are at the point where they're calling for Bloodlust at roughly the 40 to 50% marker, so make sure to get full use of your agility pot alongside trinket procs, spec cooldowns, racials, and Bloodlust. For combat, this might look like popping Adrenaline Rush with a Deep Insight, Lust, both trinkets procced, your racial, and a pot. Assassination will do much the same, just throw out Vendetta on the boss, and popping Vanish with a Garrote. Sub will re-snapshot their Rupture by vanishing to reapply Rupture with Master of Subtlety up, then pulling energy for a big Shadow Dance, riding that Find Weakness until it's about to expire, then using Preparation and reapplying that Find Weakness over and over again. Coupling this with Bloodlust, a racial ability, your trinkets, and your agility pot will act as a massive burst window that lasts a similar amount of time as your pot does. Shannox is a really straightforward fight for all 3 specs, outside of maybe having to dodge traps every now and again. You can consider this fight a target dummy with not really having much to pay attention to besides cranking the boss, so do yourself a favor. Go look at the average kill time that your raid has on this boss and fine-tune your cooldowns to match it. Most guilds are killing Shannox in sub 3 minutes at this point, which means we can guarantee for each spec at least combat will get at least 2 to 3 adrenaline rushes and potentially 3 to 4 killing sprees. Assassination will get at least 2 vendettas and 1 vanish, maybe 2 if you guys have a slow kill time. Sub will get 2 dances and 3 vanishes, 1 from preparation, and 1 extra shadow dance and extra vanish if your kill time is above 3 minutes and 30 seconds. If your kill time is slow, make sure to use preparation quickly so that vanish is put on cooldown immediately as to offer you a better chance at getting it near the end of the fight. Make sure to redirect combo points off of the trash as both assassination and combat to Shannox to ensure that you have 5 combo points on the pull. For assassination, you will open with a 5 combo point rupture. For combat, you will open with a 5 combo point slice and dice. Bonus points if you have the Slayer 2 pieces combat for the 5% haste on slice. For sub, you can skip the redirect as you have Honor Amongst Thieves to get 5 combo points for the pull. But if your guild complains, you can always redirect off of trash, strategically AFK, and then use that redirect once it comes back off cooldown on Shannox. Sub gets to optimize the target dummy fights a lot more than the other 2 specs due to the fact that in addition to just being way harder to play than the other 2 specs, they also get to use a mastery pre-pull set if you're really trying to optimize things. This isn't mandatory, but it's free DPS, and we get a ton of gear anyways, so really, why aren't you doing this? For more info, we have links to the BIS mastery sets on pre-pull in my Discord. Something all 3 specs can do before the pull goes out is fish out the 4-piece tier 12 procs. A little tip for you guys is that your 4-piece has anti-grief tech built into it, meaning that you can never get the same buff twice. So an easy way to maximize your first tricks on a pull is by fishing out the proc that is worse for you. For combat and assassination, this isn't a big deal as they actually have a decent spread of all 3 stats, but they still prefer stats like haste and mastery over crit. For sub prefers haste or crit over a mastery proc. Now, there's a lot of talk about what the best way to ensure the highest DPS for each spec on these procs is. On a simple fight like Shannox, the easiest way to maximize your DPS for assassination is to offset your hunger or trinket for a few seconds on the pull. This will ensure that your matrix trinket will proc mastery so your hunger or trinket will not overpower your mastery with a haste proc. For combat, you want to avoid crit and hope for a haste proc, but mastery isn't too bad either. For sub, you want to 1000% avoid getting a mastery proc because in full BIS you have roughly 650 mastery in total, and it has very little value to us when the buff that we're receiving is a 25% bonus. For all 3 specs, the best thing that you can do is wait until the pull has gone out, wait for both your trinkets to proc, and then snapshot your haste/mastery from your trinkets during your cooldown phase. This equates to a massive burst phase and will net you a sizable DPS bonus while your cooldowns are active. You can't control what proc you get on the pull, so there's a little bit of luck involved, but at the very least, reducing your RNG on getting the least desirable proc out of the way will give you a good chance at maximizing your DPS. And this is a good tip for every single fight in the raid, mind you, not just Shannox. Alright, there was a lot of talk about tricks of the trade there, but let's actually get into the boss fight. For combat, pre-pot into the pull, pop Slice and Dice, and then proceed to do your normal cooldown rotation. If you don't know the standard cooldown rotation, go check out the combat guide video, as well as the other 2 specs if you don't know how to do the rotation for those. Most guilds are popping Lust on pull, so it's really important to optimize your opener on a fight like this. After this, do your normal rotation and just try to capitalize on using your insights in tandem with Killing Spree and Adrenaline Rushes. Combat doesn't have an execute phase, so feel free to use your second pot whenever it makes the most sense. Generally speaking, because the fight is around 2 minutes and 30 seconds, plus maybe a little bit of overtime if your guild is killing it slower, the best time to use your second pot is basically whenever Matrix comes off cooldown in combination with your cooldowns. For Assassination, your choices are really simple. You're going to burn Vendetta on the pull and use Cold Blood with a 5 combo point in Venom. Do your normal rotation, and the moment Overkill fades from the pull, you will vanish and reapply Garrote to get Overkill again. Vendetta comes off cooldown when you are already in your execute phase, so pop Vendetta with your Agipot and spam Backstab. If your kill time is exceedingly slow, just hold off until you reach the 35% mark before using your second Vendetta, so long as you aren't wasting trinket procs to do so. If you run into a second Vanish as Assassination, just use it the moment it comes off cooldown. For sub, you will do your normal cooldown rotation of ambushing the boss on the pull, riding that Find Weakness for till the 10-second mark, and then actively pulling energy during. Shadow Dance when you are about to cap energy, and spam Ambush until 5 combo points, then Eviscerate. Make sure to use pre-med when it makes sense, and Shadow Step after Find Weakness has already been applied to the boss from your ambush. After Shadow Dance fades, whenever you have a free global, feel free to pop Preparation, and then Vanish and Shadow Step ambush the boss again to extend your Find Weakness by another 10 seconds. Note that should only be used as your Find Weakness debuff is about to fade. Continue on to your normal rotation, make sure you aren't wasting combo points from Honor Among Thieves, and Shadow Dance in combination with your Engineering Gloves, and make sure you are always pulling energy for those Shadow Dances. The best time to use your second pot is usually going to be whenever your trinkets proc near the end of the fight in combination with Shadow Dance. If your kill time is slow, you might be able to squeeze in another Vanish. In the event that you do, use it the moment it comes off cooldown. In terms of general advice on this boss, evasion if you get targeted by Rage Face, and use Sprint or Nitro Boost to run him into the nearest trap and then immediately get back to the boss if you have to. You shouldn't be popping Immolation traps, but in the event that you do, cloak the debuff off. I thought about doing a Rhyolith guide for each spec on this boss, but I'm going to be honest with you guys, it's just stupid to do so. If you're trying to optimize on this fight for any spec other than combat, you're just outright griefing the raid by playing a non-cleave spec, and the only way that you're doing decent DPS is by only hitting the spark anyways. So we're just going to talk about the only actual viable spec on this boss, which is combat. And before any of you cry and complain, this doesn't even count towards your all-star points, and I'm going to be honest with you, if you guys care about parsing on non-all-star points bosses, touch grass. This fight has some RNG in terms of where the volcanoes spawn and how good your raid is at turning the boss on a dime. So the kill speed of this boss varies super heavily, but the average guild is probably killing this between 2.5 minutes to 3.5 minutes at the moment. In my opinion, this boss is ridiculous, and if you look at all the top logs, every top parse is only cleave and fan of knives damage that doesn't count towards all-stars. So rather than being an idiot who is purposefully slowing the kill time of this boss, we will only suggest strats relevant to the boss dying quickly and maximizing effective DPS. As the fight is starting, pop your pre-pot and then Nitro Boost directly into the boss. Get 1 combo point and then immediately pop Slice and Dice and activate Blade Flurry. Build into a Shallow Insight, then immediately pop Killing Spree. After this, immediately activate Adrenaline Rush and do your normal rotation. If your guild is killing the boss quickly, there really isn't much to say in terms of when the best time to use your cooldowns are, because there's a lot of RNG depending on how the fight could play out, but we'll discuss it anyway. In terms of the best outcome for DPS, your guild will ask every player besides cleave classes to ignore sparks, which will give you, the rogue, a ton of extra uptime on them to make sure that they die at a steady pace that allows you to inflate your DPS on the left or right foot heavily. If you have an Adrenaline Rush available when a spark comes up, I think the best move that you can make is to use it on the spark and get more DPS out of that Adrenaline Rush. If not, the best option is still to redirect whatever combo points and insight that you have onto the spark and ask one of the tanks to drag the spark along whatever foot needs to be helped turned at any given time. You more than likely will only get 2 uses of Adrenaline Rush and 3 uses of Killing Spree on this fight, so just try to optimize cooldowns around the best time when they would be used. What that probably looks like for most players is the cooldowns mentioned on the poll, and then if you get lucky enough to use an Adrenaline Rush, Agility Pot, or any racial ability and Engineering Gloves on a spark. You will more than likely want to save your last Killing Spree for the burn phase at 25% on the boss in combination with whatever cooldowns that you have available at the time. More than likely, this is something like Engie Gloves, but I would say to use a second pot here, and it is a good idea to do so, but it more than likely won't see full uptime as the boss will die immediately, and you certainly get at least 1 spark during the boss, and your combat pot would have more value in a cleave situation than a single target situation, regardless of how optimized or unoptimized that spark cleave is. I wish there was more to say about this fight, but it's extremely straightforward. There isn't a whole lot to this fight outside of cleaving the entire fight until the burn phase and capitalizing on a spark spawn when you can. My closing notes on this boss would really just be, if your guild just murders the sparks the moment they spawn for their own personal DPS gain, just save your second pot for sub 35% HP on whatever foot you're DPSing and use it there. You should get most of the uptime from your Agi pot, and pretty safely if you use this, and then just pair that with a Killing Spree during the burn phase. Make sure that your redirect is available when the phase transition happens, because if you don't have redirect available, you will lose your insight, as the burn phase is a new targetable creature and not the same as the feat. So you want to just make sure that your insight is transferring over to the boss as well. Alright, and on to Alice. This is another one of those situational fights, so I'm not going to talk about downstairs. If you are downstairs, kill ads, kick them, and dodge meteors. There is no nuance to the downstairs portion of this fight because it simply does not play a role in effective DPS until the boss lands, but we will wrap back around to that later on. For 75-second trinkets on this fight, ask for a 60-second pull timer, reset them at 50 seconds. For hunger and tailoring Cloak Enchant, reset it at 45 seconds, and just don't reset Matrix. What this allows you to do is have your trinkets proc during the first few stacks of the air phase haste buff, after you've already gotten your entire setup on the boss's assassination, sub, or combat, while also making sure your trinkets will line up with the actual burn phase after Fiery Vortex. For assassination, you will open up from stealth on the boss with a garrote and do your normal rotation while saving your cooldowns till you are in the air and have at least 3 stacks of the haste buff. This goes for every spec really, but it's important to remember the boss doesn't even start Fiery Vortex for 4 minutes on the pull, and Fiery Vortex lasts about 30 seconds itself. So saving your cooldowns for 15 seconds or so into the fight isn't going to hurt you and actually nets you a DPS gain. Use Vendetta and Cold Blood off cooldown right up until before Fiery Vortex goes out. If your guild is killing the boss before the burn phase ends, make sure to pay attention to your kill time and pop Vendetta early. If your guild isn't, use it at the start of the burn phase. For sub, the same rule applies as assassination. Feel free to use your cooldowns so long as you have a set of cooldowns during the burn phase, including preparation. If your guild is killing Alice before the burn phase ends, your best option is probably just to burn a Vanish right before the down phase where you stand behind the meteor with a crit buff. The reason for this is that Rupture will fall off in this time, and you can re-snapshot the crit buff with your Master of Subtlety buff for the final phase. In the event this is the case, you will just burn your prep and Vanish as the burn phase starts, and then roll that into a Shadow Dance. I will preface, if you were getting a lot of effective uptime with a double Vanish for those 12 seconds of Master of Subtlety, this does not apply to you. Same can be said for combat. I haven't had a chance to play combat, but I imagine with all the extra haste, you're not going to be hurting on cooldowns. From the logs I have seen, most combat rogues are getting between 4 adrenaline rushes and 6 killing sprees. Easiest rule of thumb is that if you are within 30 seconds of Fiery Vortex, hold your adrenaline rush and send your killing spree at will. There isn't much min-maxing to do on this fight as combat because they don't really have any special mechanics that they can abuse like sub and assassination do. All 3 specs will use their combat pot when it seems appropriate for their kill time. If your guild isn't getting full use of their combat pot during the burn phase, make sure to pop it early to get as much DPS out of it as you can during Fiery Vortex. Now that we have cooldowns out of the way, let's talk about optimization for assassination and sub in the air phase. Assassination and sub are both extremely energy dependent specs, and I know what you're thinking, that sounds really dumb, all specs need energy. Yes, they do, but assassination has a large energy requirement to generate combo points in the form of Mutilate, and sub needs recuperation to execute their rotation properly. Because of the amount of haste we gain while upstairs, outside of the first few stacks, there isn't much need to use recoup for sub, and assassination doesn't really ever have to worry about using backstab during their execute phase. I'm saying a lot here, but it really just comes down to this. If you're playing Assassination, the moment you get enough stacks to comfortably keep up Envenom at all times, just spam Mutilate to 5 combo points and only use Envenom at 5 combo points. Same can be said for your Ruptures. Drop the Backstab glyph because you simply don't need it and use the Vendetta glyph instead. For sub, you can either drop the Backstab glyph and replace it with either Glyph of Eviscerate or Glyph of Shadow Dance. Both are pretty big DPS increases over Backstab, but from what we simmed, Shadow Dance came out ahead by roughly 200 to 280 DPS. Alright, on to Baleroc. This is another sit and burn fight, so a lot of what we said on Shannox will directly transfer over to this fight. Rather than repeating myself with your openers, just remember what I said before. Redirect combo points onto the boss, use a mastery set of your sub, and fish out tricks procs that you want to avoid with your force set. For a lot of guilds, we're getting to the point where everyone is geared enough to burn this boss around 4.5 minutes, and maybe a little bit faster or slower depending on how proficient your guild is. If you're in this camp, the biggest thing that you want to pay attention to is cooldown management. For combat, you're more than likely to see 3 to 4 adrenaline rushes and maybe 4 to 5 killing sprees on this boss. Do your normal cooldown rotation at the start of the boss with a 5 combo point slice and dice. Make sure to use tricks right after your trinkets proc to ensure that you get a chance to snapshot the haste value on your trinkets and blast the boss. Whenever your trinket CDs line up with a decent insight and cooldown, send your combat pot and your cooldowns with insight alongside your agility pot. If you have Matrix, you basically wait for Matrix to come off cooldown and you plan your cooldowns accordingly around it. For Assassination, ask for a long enough pull timer to offset your hunger or trinket by a few seconds on the pull. Reminder that hunger is a 60-second cooldown. Redirect 5 combo points into the boss. Start the boss with a Garrote, into a 5 combo point Rupture. If you get a combo point, Slice and Dice. If not, Mutilate into a Slice and Dice. Then, rip Vendetta and do your normal rotation. Make sure to use Cold Blood at 5 combo points. The moment Overkill fades, pop your Vanish, and then Garrote again, and continue on with your normal rotation. Use your Vendetta off cooldown, unless your guild is killing the boss super fast. If you were killing the boss near the 4-minute mark, it's probably better just to save your second Vendetta for when Vanish comes off cooldown. If you're getting over 10 seconds of uptime on your third Vendetta though, feel free to rip it off cooldown as you see fit. Just make sure to pair your Vendetta in the execute phase with your agility pot, and you should be blasting. For sub, you will build or redirect 5 combo points onto the boss, pop a Slice and Dice with your mastery set, and then start your cooldown rotation. You will send cooldowns as normal as they come off cooldown. Because sub doesn't have to worry about the uptime of their cooldowns in the same way that Assassination does, there isn't really a downside to sending any of your cooldowns the moment they come off cooldown outside of comboing them with something like a trinket proc. This is dependent on your kill time, but generally speaking, you want to try and pair your third Vanish near the end of the fight with your second use of Matrix, comboed with a Shadow Dance in your agility pot. Outside of this is a target dummy fight. There isn't really any way to game the soaking mechanic, and most guilds are just having melee do the 1 stack and weave strat, so really just do what you're supposed to do mechanically and blast the boss. Only 2 bosses left, and I'm going to be honest, this is feeling more like a marathon than a sprint at this point, but on to Domo. Kill times are all over the place for this boss, so rather than getting into the nitty-gritty with cooldowns specifically, the thing I will say for Domo is this. Cooldowns should be used as often as possible so long as they make sense. If you pop a Vendetta right before a phase transition and get stunned by Searing Seeds, you should have waited a few seconds rather than screwing yourself with any of your cooldowns on whatever spec you're playing, so pay attention to phase transitions as much as possible and make decisions accordingly. For all 3 specs, redirect your combo points off the trash onto Domo to get a 5 combo point start on the boss. For Assassination, you will Rupture. For combat, you will send a 5 combo point Slice and Dice. And for sub, you will mastery set Slice and Dice. Ask for a long pull timer here on the boss for all 3 specs because you will want to offset your trinkets from when you get the 100% concentration buff. Matrix is really annoying to reset here, and likely your guild won't want to sit around for 2 minutes, so try to make sure it's popped halfway through the trash pack and plan a pull timer around it. For 75-second trinkets, swap them on a 60-second pull timer at 55 seconds. For hunger, swap it at 40 seconds alongside your Tailor and Cloak Enchant. The fight is fairly basic for every spec in terms of what the optimal option in terms of cooldowns and when to use them is. The easy answer, immediately when you get to 100% concentration. If you chose to fish out the tricks proc that you want to avoid before the pull, wait to use tricks until you get concentration buff to hopefully snapshot your trinkets into your tricks proc for that epic Big Poggers Big Gamba DPS boost. For Assassination, it's very simple. You will pop Vanish when you get to 100% concentration with Vendetta and a 5 combo point Cold-Blooded and Venom. From this point, do your normal rotation, and every 2 minutes use Vendetta. The only time I would recommend holding your Vendettas is when you would otherwise lose uptime because you would get stunned between a phase transition. When you get below 35%, pair your Agipot with a Vendetta and a Cold Blood alongside any racial DPS cooldowns you might have and blast the boss and execute with Backstab. For combat, all the top logs have them doing their standard cooldown rotation even before concentration happens, so feel free to rip a killing spree in a shallow insight and follow up by immediately popping Adrenaline Rush and using your cooldowns the moment they come up. You will not be capable of parsing on this boss if you have to kill ads, because the ads are not included in the parse. So if you are in charge of that, don't worry about using cooldowns optimally for single target. Use them optimally for cleave. If you are capable of ignoring the ads, just make sure that you are using your cooldowns in tandem with a decent insight and use them essentially off cooldown outside of Adrenaline Rush when a stun is coming. Make sure to save your combat pop for when your trinket procs and you have a deep insight that would line up with a set of cooldowns, as you don't have an execute phase. Now for everyone's favorite spec, Subtlety. Subtlety will start out the same way as Assassination. You will hold cooldowns, but with the specific intention of snapshotting your Rupture on the boss when concentration reaches 100%. Go ahead and do your normal opener and put a Rupture on the boss. You can essentially ignore the mastery set if you want to on this boss, because the DPS gain you will get out of it is really small by comparison to a proper snapshot, and you will need to refresh your Slice of Dice buff, as you were intentionally trying to let Rupture drop as you get to max concentration anyway. Resetting your cloak enchant, holding your gloves, and your tricks are going to be really important on this boss specifically, because those full DPS Rupture ticks are actually a really good extra portion of DPS. The way this will play out is, right before you get to the 100% damage buff, you will want to refresh both Recoup and Slice and Dice so that you can have a really clean burn phase when less goes out. You will let Rupture drop, and the moment you get the buff, you will vanish, pop pre-med ambush on the boss with gloves activated and your Tailor and Cloak enchant rolling, with your Tricks of the Trade buff also active, bonus points if you fish out a haste or crit proc for this, as the haste will snapshot with trinkets and the crit will snapshot your Rupture. Haste is inherently a higher DPS bonus, but we take free DPS where we can get it. From this point, you will ride that first Find Weakness until it's about to expire, then Shadow Dance and ride that Find Weakness until it expires, then prep, vanish, and ambush again for the additional 10 seconds of Find Weakness. During this opener, you will have to make an active choice to refresh, Slice, and Recoup in a fashion that isn't optimal, but I promise the DPS gain from a fully snapshotted Rupture makes up for the slight annoyance of them dropping at the similar time to one another. The only downside of this is that because Rupture has a ton of modifiers, firstly, the Master of Subtlety buff, then Concentration, then the Agility from your gloves, and AP from your Tailor and Cloak enchant, then finally the crit buff from your tricks if you got it, the fight becomes a never-ending game of, if I let that Rupture fall off, I'll never get that Rupture back. In terms of min-maxing this fight, almost every top log in this fight is really just mashing their cooldowns the moment they come up for the raw uptime of it and not losing your concentration buff. The strategy you use will play a larger role in this boss than optimal cooldown usage. Lastly, every spec should take advantage of cloaking off the Searing Seed debuff that Domo casts. The stun itself does not last as long as the cast for the debuff, so while you're sitting there with your thumb up your ass, spam your cloak keybind like you're mashing buttons in Smash Bros and you should be fine. Depending on the strat that you're using, you will, for the most part, be able to maintain 100% uptime on your concentration buff so long as you don't fail mechanics or get really unlucky with Searing Seed timers. Holy crap. Alright, boys, we finally made it. We're at the big bad man himself, Ragnaros. Throughout this video, I've littered basic concepts for maximizing DPS that should basically carry you through the most important steps for every single encounter from start to finish, whether that's Mastery pre-pull sets, Fishing Tricks buff, snapshotting a Rupture, offsetting your trinket timers for Assassination, and etc, etc, etc. All those apply here, and rather than making this boss guide 10 minutes longer, I think I've already beaten those concepts into your head. If not, feel free to rewatch the earlier portions. When we were talking about Rag, I'm going to put it plainly for you guys, the kill times for this boss are all over the place, so trying to give you a quote-unquote optimal strat for this boss just doesn't really work, and we're just going to simplify cooldowns to this. Before Phase 4, if you can get full uptime on your cooldowns, use them. It's really that simple. Obviously, you want to pair cooldowns with an insight well for combat, but outside of that, use them as often as possible so long as they will be used effectively. The main caveat to this is that as sub, you have to be behind the boss to use Shadow Dance, so as a sub player, you need to get really comfy with paying attention to when Rag is using Sulfur's Smash as to not risk wasting your cooldowns because he is facing you when he targets a player in the raid. Now, I want to talk about the most important things that we can do to optimize each spec, and we are going to bounce around a lot here, so pay attention and take notes. Firstly, during phase transitions, Combat Rogue should take any and all opportunities to pad cleave damage onto the Sons of Flames and Lava Scions. If you can get your raid to leave one up going into Phase 3, you're going to blast huge numbers onto the boss and a Scion. During Phase 2, throw NG bombs at Molten Seeds because it's free DPS, so you should be taking advantage of that. In between Molten Seed spawns, there's 1 minute of downtime before the next set spawns. All 3 specs should use this opportunity to stop front-facing the boss and get behind the boss to reduce parries. This is especially important for Assassination and Sub, as Assassination doesn't have expertise cap, and Sub can't backstab or Shadow Dance unless they are behind the boss. For sub, make sure after phase transitions to capitalize and re-snapshot your Rupture with a Vanish when available. Depending on your kill times, Vanish pretty conveniently comes off of cooldown after most of the phase transitions anyway. Most guilds are killing Molten Seeds insanely fast by this point, but if you want, you can pop Evasion as Assassination, or Combat, and either Blade Flurry or Fan of Knives to get some extra DPS on Molten Seeds by AoEing them. You should be using Feint whenever a trap is being popped, no matter what spec you are. You can also cloak them to reduce healing even further. Alongside this, if you aren't very good at the dance in phase 2 and 3, you can always cloak to ensure that you don't die if you are in a bind. Outside of this, there isn't much to say for the first few phases. Your biggest DPS gains are going to be in the execution of your rotation and playing the fight properly while capitalizing on free DPS until phase 4. Alright, so the most important part of the fight. Phase 4 Rag has a lot of RNG and is heavily dependent on your abilities group to execute the boss fight properly to min-max your DPS. Your parses on this boss will fluctuate week to week based on how good and bad your tanks are at ensuring the boss gets in roots early and often, and also that they aren't screwing you by forcing you to front face the boss. For sub, the most important part of the fight is the initial Vanish going into the phase to make sure that you get a snapshotted Rupture back onto the boss. Bonus points if you can line gloves and tailoring and chain up with this, but if not, you're already doing more than the average player at the start of the phase. Secondly, Entangling Roots comes out about a minute after the phase starts, so try to use Shadow Dance quickly to make sure it's off cooldown for the Roots. Roots is a 50% damage bonus increase for 10 seconds, and because Shadow Dance is on a 1 minute cooldown, you can basically guarantee a Shadow Dance for each Roots as well as Vanish on every other root. For Assassination, because Vendetta lasts 30 seconds, it's less important to exactly time when you would use your Vendetta and just try to pair it in the window in which Roots would be popped while it's active. Obviously, save Cold Blood for the Roots itself. And do yourself the biggest favor, if the boss is running towards a Roots, just Vanish immediately and Garrote before, that way you're not wasting globals during that stun on the Garrote itself. For combat, you have a unique opportunity to cleave Rag while meteors are in the ice, but you can't cleave off of Rag to the meteor, so you need to target swap to them. If they are dying super fast, I'd say it's better not to lose your insight, but if they aren't dying fast and you would get good uptime on them, feel free to redirect and cleave them for extra free DPS with Blade Flurry. You should use your cooldowns as soon as they come up into the phase because they are more than likely going to be back up before the first root. Because combat has the insight system, you can't really ensure that you will be in a great insight during the root buff, but regardless, you want to plan your cooldowns around roots, and make sure that you don't need to refresh a slice and dice when they are up. For all 3 specs, you can minimize any sort of downtime on the boss by dodging Dread Flame when the boss isn't on an ice patch and spam Feint off cooldown to reduce the stacking dot when you aren't on the ice yourself. Make sure you're paying attention to where the ice is at all times and never go over 15 stacks. Save Cloak for the rare occasion where a Dread Flame spawns under you and you have to take a tick of the dot, or when your stacks are really high. All 3 specs want to save their agility pot till roots spawn in tandem with their big cooldowns to ensure that they are getting as many modifiers as humanly possible during that damage buff. The last thing I will say about this boss fight is that Dread Flames can spawn randomly anywhere at any time, so don't be super greedy, because you aren't a good DPS if you're a dead DPS. Trust me, I've made the mistake multiple weeks now, and I am paying for it in lost parses. I hope you guys enjoyed the guide. If you did, feel free to drop a like, comment, and sub to my YouTube channel for more guides in the future. If you didn't, feel free to flame me about why this guide took so long to come out. But on a real note, I want to give a brief apology to my audience if you did make it all the way through this video. My health and my life outside of content creation has been extremely hectic lately, and I've had multiple family members die, and a lot of other not so fantastic things happen that's made it extremely hard to push out content in a timely fashion. I appreciate everyone who supported the channel, and now that my life is getting back to normal, I should be able to push out content more regularly for you guys. I love you guys a lot, and thank you for allowing me to do what I love for all of you. Oh, and before we end the video, make sure to join my Discord. Links in the description below, and make sure to check out my Twitch. Anyone who subs to my Twitch is granted access to the Week Aura Pack that I made with my friends NetX, Backstabby, and Bicarb. The Week Aura Pack will show you everything that you need to pump, as well as a text-to-speech that calls out your 4-set bonus, an Honor Amongst Thieves trackers for any of you sub players, and basically removes any of the fluff that all those other Week Auras have, like, when's the last time you cared about tracking combat readiness? Like, why does every Week Aura Pack have combat readiness in it, you know? Anyway, until next time, gamers. Peace!